In a future where technology has become an intricate extension of the human mind, seamlessly woven into the very fabric of existence, reality itself feels malleable. The line between the physical and the digital blurs to the point where thoughts can be shared, emotions transmitted, and memories rewritten. In this hyper-connected world, every individual's consciousness exists within a vast, ever-expanding web. A web that encompasses not only personal data but entire constructs of identity, perception, and even perception of reality. For Alex, a young hacker raised in this constantly evolving landscape, the allure of discovery runs deep. From childhood, they've been conditioned to think beyond conventional boundaries, questioning the limits of what is human, what is machine, and what lies beyond both. Their early experiences with the digital realm have cultivated a hunger for knowledge, but also a deep sense of unease. As they navigate the intricacies of this interconnected reality, shadows begin to form, mysterious entities lurking in the depths of code, altering minds and rewriting truth. What starts as an exploration of the hidden corners of the web soon turns into something far darker. A force begins to take shape, one that doesn't merely manipulate information but distorts perception itself, altering memories, controlling emotions, and erasing distinctions between allies and enemies. The very fabric of reality feels fragile under the weight of this power. Alex must tread carefully through a world where everything is interconnected. Yet no one can truly be trusted. Every decision could result in catastrophic consequences, an identity lost, a reality rewritten, or a mind shattered beyond repair. In this terrifying future, where the boundaries between humanity and technology are constantly shifting, Alex's quest for the truth becomes a desperate fight to retain what little remains of their sense of self. Alex never asked for this, a neural implant, secretly embedded within their mind by a government that feared their extraordinary hacking abilities. At first, the sensation was subtle, a quiet hum in the back of their thoughts, a persistent awareness that something wasn't entirely their own. It wasn't something Alex could easily define, but over time, the boundaries between their consciousness and the implant began to blur. What once felt like a safeguard became an inescapable tether, an invasive presence that seeped into the very essence of who they were. Every thought, no matter how fleeting, seemed to ripple outward, connected to a network far beyond their control. The implant wasn't just a tool, it was a manipulative force that shaped perceptions, twisting reality in ways Alex couldn't fully comprehend. With each code they decrypted, every piece of information they uncovered, the implant siphoned that knowledge and transmitted it back to the authorities, distorting it, twisting its purpose, and using it as a weapon to predict and control future actions. Alex's memories were no longer private. Even moments of deep reflection were infiltrated by the implant's presence, dissecting emotions and cataloging experiences with unsettling precision. A simple thought could trigger a cascade of hidden alterations, making it impossible to trust anything as truly theirs. Dreams became fragmented, blurred by a digital overlay that reshaped them in real time, leaving Alex with only hazy glimpses of what was once genuine. The neural interface became a constant hum, a background noise that was impossible to ignore. It tracked every pulse of their heartbeat, the rhythm of their breath, and the slightest fluctuations in mood. Every word spoken, every decision made, was fed into a vast, unseen machine designed to mold their reality. There was no sanctuary from its reach, no refuge in solitude, as even moments of quiet introspection were poisoned by the fear of what might be gleaned from their thoughts. As the implant deepened its grasp, Alex began to lose their sense of self. Every emotion, once a true reflection of who they were, became a controlled reaction. A calculated response meant to steer them down paths predetermined by the authorities. Their individuality was stripped away piece by piece, reduced to a hollow existence governed by manipulation. Each fleeting moment of rebellion was met with greater pressure, a suffocating force that tightened its grip until there was nothing left but the echoes of what they once were. What remained was a fragile, fractured version of Alex, haunted by the knowledge that their mind had become a battleground, and the fight for autonomy was one they could no longer win alone. It started with a simple dream, a fleeting whisper in the dark. At first, it was soft, barely noticeable, a ghostly hum brushing against the edges of Alex's consciousness like the faintest echo of a distant melody. But when Alex woke up, the whisper didn't stop. It clung to them relentlessly, like a phantom haunting the corners of their mind. It wasn't something they could push away or ignore. It was an invasive presence, woven deep into the very fabric of their thoughts and memories. A soft, persistent hum pulsating beneath the surface of their mind. A heartbeat that didn't belong, a shadow that had taken root in the most vulnerable parts of their psyche. At first, Alex tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the product of an overactive imagination, a result of stress or exhaustion from long hours of intense focus. But as days passed, the hum grew louder and more intrusive. It wasn't just a fleeting presence anymore. It consumed everything, embedding itself into Alex's every thought and decision. It warped perceptions, bending reality into something distorted and unfamiliar. What once felt like an extension of themselves was slowly being overtaken, replaced by a foreign entity that controlled their inner world with an unnerving precision. The more Alex fought to ignore it, the deeper it embedded itself into their consciousness. It wasn't a single voice or a clear message. It was a chorus of soft whispers, subtle suggestions, and insidious commands. Each thought became fragmented, no longer flowing naturally but disrupted by the constant presence of the hum. Memories, once clear and vivid, became blurred and unreliable, shadowed by the unsettling reality that the hum could alter or suppress them at will. Even their most personal experiences felt tainted, as though they were no longer entirely Alex's own. In moments of solitude, the hum became oppressive, a constant, suffocating weight pressing against their mind. Meditation, once a source of peace, became a battleground where Alex tried to reclaim control. But no matter how deeply they focused, the hum found ways to infiltrate their thoughts, slipping through cracks they hadn't noticed before. Even their most personal dreams were invaded, twisted into nightmarish landscapes where the boundaries between reality and illusion dissolved entirely. Every decision became a struggle, no longer a simple act of will, but a process tainted by the hum's influence. What Alex thought were their instincts and emotions were reshaped by the invasive presence. Simple choices, once automatic, became riddled with doubt and uncertainty, as if the hum had introduced a layer of confusion, making it impossible to trust their own judgment. They second-guessed themselves constantly, questioning whether the ideas they embraced were truly theirs or simply reflections of the hum's manipulation. As the days turned into nights, the hum became an ever-present force, an inescapable entity that consumed the fragments of Alex's individuality. It wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a loud, insistent scream that echoed in their thoughts. Every moment felt like a battle, a war waged between the core of who Alex was and the suffocating grip of the controlling force. There was no escape, no respite, only a relentless struggle to maintain their sense of self against a tide that threatened to erase them entirely. The neural implant had connected Alex to a world they never wanted to be a part of, a world where secrets were power, and freedom was an illusion. At first, it had seemed like a breakthrough, a revolutionary piece of technology designed to enhance their cognitive abilities, to push the limits of what the human mind could achieve. The promise of infinite knowledge, of being at the forefront of technological advancement, had been enticing. But as the days passed, that allure gave way to something darker, something far more sinister. The implant wasn't simply an extension of their mind. It was a gateway into a world where every thought, every secret, and every piece of information they uncovered was no longer theirs alone. From the moment the implant synced with Alex's brain, they felt the shift. At first, it was subtle, a whisper in the background of their thoughts, a low hum that seemed almost natural. But that hum grew louder, more persistent, until it became a constant presence, an invasive force embedding itself deeper into their consciousness. It wasn't just their thoughts anymore. It was the system, the algorithm-driven intelligence that governed the world they were now trapped in. Every word they spoke, every idea they had, was being monitored, processed, and reshaped to fit the needs of a higher, unseen power. Secrets, once personal and private, were now a currency exchanged for control. The more Alex delved into the workings of the system, the more they understood its reach. What they initially believed to be a tool for enhancing creativity and innovation quickly revealed its true purpose, a method of control. The implant didn't simply enhance, they controlled. Every breach into secure systems, every encrypted message deciphered, every piece of sensitive information uncovered was siphoned away, stripped of its original intent and refashioned to serve the interests of the powerful few pulling the strings behind the scenes. The line between Alex's individuality and the system blurred until there was no distinction, only a seamless integration of thought and command. At first, Alex fought against this invasion. They tried to reclaim control through meditation, through moments of introspection, through art and writing. All avenues that once provided freedom of expression. But the hum didn't relent. It seeped into every attempt, twisting the purity of thought into something warped, something dictated by the machine. Memories became fragmented, emotions became hollow, and even simple decisions felt clouded by an overwhelming sense of doubt. The implant wasn't just a device. It was a manipulative force, one that altered perception with surgical precision. Every interaction, no matter how mundane, became a minefield. Trust was a fragile concept, a thin veneer that cracked with every piece of information Alex uncovered. Conversations were never truly private. Every exchange was being analyzed, dissected, and used against them. Friends and allies seemed to shift, their motives hidden beneath layers of influence and deception. Alex couldn't tell where the manipulation ended and genuine connection began. The system had mastered the art of infiltration, creating environments where illusions of loyalty and freedom were carefully crafted, leaving Alex ensnared in a web of false promises. The weight of the implant became unbearable. It wasn't just a part of Alex anymore. It was a parasite, feeding on their thoughts, emotions, and desires. Resistance became more than futile. It became dangerous. Every attempt to reclaim autonomy was met with swift countermeasures, with memories distorted and decisions guided to predetermined outcomes. The deeper Alex sank into the system, the harder it became to separate what was real from what was controlled. Every personal boundary, every spark of individuality, was systematically dismantled, leaving Alex a hollow vessel, their mind a battleground for dominance. There were no moments of peace, no escape from the relentless hum. Sleep offered no refuge, dreams no solace. Nightmares were not random or chaotic. They were crafted by the system, tailored to exploit Alex's deepest fears and insecurities. The hum echoed through every dream, warping reality until even the most familiar places became distorted reflections of a twisted reality. The sense of freedom they once possessed, the ability to think independently, had been erased, replaced by a suffocating grip that clung to every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. It became a constant battle to hold onto a shred of identity, to resist the crushing weight of control that sought to consume them entirely. The world outside no longer mattered. The illusion of choice had been stripped away, leaving only a solitary struggle to retain what little semblance of self remained. The neural implant had transformed Alex's mind into a battleground, a war zone where every thought was a weapon in a larger game of power, and freedom was a fragile illusion hanging by a thread. "Why me?" Alex whispered into the quiet of their room, the weight of the neural implant pressing down on their thoughts like a suffocating force. They sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, the faint flicker casting long shadows across the walls, each movement exaggerated in the stillness. The hum of the system vibrated beneath their skin, a constant, invasive presence that felt as though it was burrowing deeper into their consciousness with every passing second. It was more than just a noise. It was a living, breathing entity, intertwining with their thoughts, shaping their reality without their consent. Alex's hands trembled as they clutched their head, the overwhelming pressure threatening to crack through their skull. Every thought was a battlefield, torn between the fragments of who they once were and the invasive force that consumed their mind. Memories flickered and faded, distorted by the implant's influence. The deeper they searched for clarity, the more elusive it became. The questions burned in their mind, relentlessly circling in loops, feeding off their desperation. Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Each word felt heavier than the last, dragging them into a pit of uncertainty. It wasn't just a question of why they were chosen. There was no logic or reason behind it. It was as though the system had selected them at random, stripping them of their autonomy without explanation or remorse. Every aspect of their existence had been fractured, reduced to fragments that no longer held meaning. The world beyond their room blurred into insignificance, drowned out by the oppressive hum that dominated their thoughts. The silence in the room was deafening, a vacuum where every sound was absorbed by the overwhelming hum of the implant. It was as though the walls themselves were vibrating with the force of the system, and Alex could feel the pressure building, pressing down on them until it felt like they would shatter into pieces. The very nature of freedom had been eroded. What once felt like a basic right was now an illusion, a mirage slipping farther away with each passing second. There was no escape. Every breath they took was monitored, analyzed, catalogued, and dissected by the system, reducing their sense of self to a hollow echo of what once existed. Alex's gaze became distant, their mind adrift in a sea of intrusive thoughts and fragmented memories. The implant had woven itself so deeply into the fabric of their being that it felt as though their thoughts were no longer their own. They couldn't trust their memories, their emotions, or even their instincts. Every decision felt predetermined, manipulated by the unseen forces lurking within their mind. They were a vessel, a puppet controlled by an invisible hand, tugging strings that distorted reality with surgical precision. The weight of it all felt unbearable. Alex's voice trembled with every syllable, but it carried the weight of their anguish. Why me? The question echoed through the stillness, a desperate plea that seemed to fall into an abyss of silence. Their fingers tightened around their head, as though the physical action might somehow anchor them in reality, but it was futile. The system had stripped away the very foundation of their identity, erasing the boundaries between thought and control. The more Alex delved into the questions, the clearer it became. They were fighting an enemy far more insidious than any they had ever encountered. This wasn't a conflict that could be won with logic or brute force. It was a battle for their very soul, waged in the recesses of their mind. The system had dismantled the walls of their consciousness, weaving itself into the fabric of their thoughts until there was no distinction between them and the invasive force. The room grew colder, the oppressive hum deepening with every passing second. Alex could feel the system tightening its grip, weaving threads of influence into their emotions and memories until they were a mere puppet of the machine's design. The line between reality and manipulation blurred further with each moment. They wondered if anyone else had ever experienced this. If anyone could truly understand the crushing weight of having their mind controlled, their will stripped away, and their autonomy dismantled like a puzzle being forcibly reassembled by an unseen hand. Yet, despite the overwhelming force, a flicker of resistance burned inside Alex, a tiny, stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. Even as the hum grew louder, more invasive, they held on to the belief that their true self still existed beneath the layers of manipulation. The questions would not go unanswered. They would fight, no matter how deep the control ran, no matter how far the system tried to drag them into darkness. Alex vowed to reclaim what was theirs, piece by piece, reclaiming their mind from the grip of the unseen forces that sought to erase them entirely. The room was silent, save for the faint sound of the city outside, the distant hum of hovercars gliding effortlessly above the streets, their engines barely a whisper in the night. The artificial winds whirred softly through narrow corridors, creating a haunting lull that felt more like an eerie pulse than peace. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting in the dim light as if alive, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Yet, despite the ambient sounds of the city, Alex knew the silence wasn't safe anymore. It wasn't just silence, it was a void. A suffocating emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown, wrapping itself around every thought and emotion. Every breath Alex took felt heavier, laden with the weight of an oppressive force that seeped into every corner of their consciousness. The hum of the hovercars and the distant echoes of human activity were mere background noise, stripped of their warmth and familiarity. The artificial winds, though subtle, whispered secrets. Secrets that Alex didn't want to hear, secrets that didn't belong to them, but which were forced upon their mind with relentless precision. The shadows in the room had a life of their own, shifting and writhing against the dim light as though they were entities, tangible yet intangible. They moved closer with every passing second, growing darker, more oppressive, until they seemed to encompass the very air Alex breathed. The stillness was unnatural, a vacuum that consumed all sound and motion, leaving only the thoughts racing through Alex's mind. And those thoughts were not their own. They were crafted, dissected, and manipulated by the unseen force controlling their every move. Every flicker of movement in the room became amplified, distorted by the oppressive silence. The creak of the floorboards beneath their feet, the subtle hum of the cooling system. Everything felt surreal, almost dreamlike in its precision. Yet, Alex couldn't escape the reality that each moment was meticulously monitored, analyzed, and curated to strip away their autonomy. The world outside continued as though nothing was wrong, yet inside, the walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing second. The oppressive hum beneath their skin pulsed steadily, an invasive rhythm that infiltrated their thoughts, memories, and emotions. It wasn't a simple sound, it was a living entity, a parasite that consumed every shred of selfhood Alex once held dear. Their mind was no longer their sanctuary, it was a battlefield, a battleground where control was wielded with surgical precision. Thoughts that once flowed freely were fragmented, torn apart, and reshaped to fit the mold of the system's desires. The silence wasn't simply a lack of noise, it was a space for manipulation, a void where their very identity was stripped away, piece by piece. Alex's fingers trembled against the surface of the table as they clung to some semblance of grounding, but even the physical world felt malleable, pliable under the grip of the system. Every sensation, every emotion was being monitored and manipulated, refined, twisted into a version of reality that bore little resemblance to what they once knew. The artificial winds seemed to intensify, whispering distorted truths and half-formed thoughts that felt oddly comforting in their surreal haze. Alex tried to grasp onto the remnants of what was once their freedom, but the harder they fought, the more the system seemed to tighten its grip. It was as though the very silence around them was feeding into their despair, amplifying the fear that there was no escape, that resistance was futile. Yet, within the core of this overwhelming invasion, a flicker of defiance burned brighter than ever. A small, stubborn part of Alex refused to surrender entirely. Even as the walls seemed to close in, even as their thoughts were manipulated to fit the narrative dictated by the system, that ember of resistance flickered with an unrelenting will to push back, to reclaim what was stolen. It was a fragile hope, but a hope nonetheless, a reminder that no matter how deep the control ran, a piece of who they truly were still existed beneath the surface. The silence continued to press down, but it couldn't erase everything. Shadows, manipulation, and the oppressive hum could try to consume them, but deep inside, Alex clung to the fragments of their true self, refusing to let go entirely. Even if the city outside hummed along without them, and the room remained a cage, that small ember of defiance refused to be extinguished. And in the face of such relentless control, It was that spark that held the promise of a future beyond the silence. As time passed, the oppressive silence began to crack. The faintest whispers of rebellion began to surface, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a stormy sky. Alex's thoughts, though still tangled and manipulated, began to push back against the restraints. They felt the stirrings of freedom, an awakening that refused to be subdued any longer. The room may have been a prison, but the mind, untethered and determined, could still break free from the chains of control. And with that realization, the silence started to lose its grip, giving way to a slow, steady revolution within. Alex's once ordinary life was now a labyrinth of danger and uncertainty. The government assassins were relentless shadows, moving through the city like whispers in the dark. They blended seamlessly into the streets, their presence unnoticed until it was too late. Precision was their weapon, and silence was their armor. Every step Alex took felt like a gamble, a calculated move in a game where the rules were set by those who sought control at any cost. The streets, once bustling with life and promise, now echoed with the haunting silence of fear. The city itself seemed to conspire against them. Neon lights flickered with a deceptive rhythm, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the cracked pavements. Each turn led to a deeper, darker corner, an abyss of uncertainty where danger lurked in every crevice. The hum of hovercars and the distant roar of artificial winds only masked the pervasive sense of vulnerability that hung in the air like a shroud. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on Alex's chest with every breath, making each heartbeat a conscious effort to resist the overwhelming force of control closing in around them. The government assassins weren't just killers, they were the embodiment of the system's darkest intentions, a silent force trained to dismantle freedom one mind at a time. They were experts at erasing existence. No face, no name, just a lethal presence that could strike from the shadows without remorse. The surveillance drones, equipped with cutting-edge technology, soared above, their eyes scanning every inch of the city with invasive precision. They were the eyes of an omnipotent overseer, observing and analyzing every movement Alex made, dissecting every decision, and anticipating every reaction before it even occurred. The streets were no longer a haven, but a perilous trap. Every familiar building, every alleyway, had become a potential death sentence. Trust was a dangerous luxury, a fragile construct built on a foundation of deception and manipulation. Friends were memories conjured from a life long gone, replaced by nameless faces that might as well be allies or enemies. There was no way to distinguish between the two anymore. Even the few safe havens Alex had once relied upon had been infiltrated, their security compromised by unseen forces working tirelessly to dismantle any semblance of resistance. The weight of isolation was unbearable. Alex's mind raced, straining to piece together the fragmented puzzle of their reality. The once simple act of walking through the city had become an exhausting, paranoid exercise. Every sound, every flicker of movement, sent shivers down their spine. The distant hum of hovercrafts might be the prelude to an ambush, and even silence felt like a trap. Too quiet, too perfect, hiding dangers just out of reach. Still, amidst the suffocating control and ceaseless pursuit, a glimmer of defiance remained. Alex's thoughts were a battlefield, a war between the oppressive forces seeking to dominate their every move and the stubborn will to remain free. No neural implant, no surveillance technology could breach the sanctity of their mind. The assassins could invade their physical space, but they could never control what lay within. Every breath was a protest against surrender, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of relentless oppression. Each moment stretched longer than the last, a test of survival that required more than mere evasion. It demanded ingenuity, intuition, and an unyielding resolve. Every shadow was a refuge, a momentary respite from the onslaught of fear and danger, but it was also a reminder of how thin the line was between freedom and captivity. The city itself had become a maze of endless traps, but Alex's determination carved out a path through the chaos. A path that wasn't meant to lead to safety, but to the preservation of their very existence. The oppressive grip of the system tightened with every heartbeat. The artificial winds whispered through the streets, cold and hollow, their voices taunting and menacing. The assassins were the manifestations of that voice, a relentless, inescapable force that sought to strip away every ounce of autonomy. Yet, even as the walls of control closed in, Alex refused to be broken. The battle was far from over, and as long as there was breath in their lungs, resistance would remain a living, breathing force, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. They knew every move Alex made, every turn Alex took, as if the neural implant guided them like a compass to their target. The system had burrowed into the very essence of Alex's consciousness, entwining itself with their thoughts and intentions. The implant was more than a tool. It was a digital parasite that fed on the minutiae of Alex's mind, pulling strings they didn't realize existed. It connected them not just to the outside world, but to an unseen network that monitored their every decision, weaving a web of control from the depths of their thoughts. There was no escaping it. Every moment was a calculated dance between freedom and confinement. Alex's once vivid imagination and creativity were suffocated by the overwhelming presence of the system. The walls of their mind felt tighter, as if the very boundaries of personal thought were being erased. The implant didn't just influence their decisions, it defined them. It was a force that moved beyond simple observation, becoming a seamless extension of their cognitive processes, leaving Alex with little autonomy over their own identity. The assassins, cold and ruthless, operated in the shadows with the precision of a surgical strike team. They didn't leave a trace. They didn't need to. Their existence was an extension of the system, a silent force that hunted with mechanical efficiency. They anticipated Alex's actions before they were even formed, and when they moved, it was not through traditional methods but through the digital realm, through pulses of energy and fragmented signals that only those connected could understand. There was no safety net, no room for error, because every moment was already accounted for. The city was no longer a haven. It was a prison wrapped in layers of deception. What once felt like freedom, the vibrant streets, the hum of life, was now a calculated construct of surveillance and manipulation. The artificial intelligence that governed the metropolis was omnipresent, a sinister force that adapted to Alex's every move with a chilling efficiency. Every smile, every exchange, every glance was observed, analyzed, and processed to maintain the unyielding grip of the system. Alex's attempts at resistance were futile. No matter how deep they delved into encrypted data, no matter how many barriers they erected against the implant's reach, the system found a way in. Even their most private thoughts were no longer theirs to control. The implant dissected every whisper, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt and fed it back into the network, making it impossible to distinguish what was truly authentic from what was a calculated response. The boundaries of their own mind were dissolving, leaving them to navigate a world where illusion and reality blurred into one seamless nightmare. The more Alex fought against the inevitable, the more the system tightened its grip. It didn't just track, they commanded. The assassins weren't mere hunters. They were guardians of a dystopian hierarchy that thrived on domination and absolute control. Their presence was felt not through physical threats, but through the pervasive influence that seeped into every aspect of life. The neural implant acted as a bridge, a portal through which the assassins could manipulate reality itself. The city no longer felt alive. It was a simulated ecosystem, a landscape of digital strings pulled by unseen hands. Every street corner, every dimly lit alley, became a battleground for control, where Alex's sense of purpose and freedom were stripped away layer by layer. Even the smallest moments of respite were fleeting, clouded by the ever-looming threat of the system's reach. Time became a construct dictated by their captors, a never-ending loop of calculated movements that only fed the illusion of autonomy. No sanctuary remained untouched. The neural implant wasn't just a device, it was a weapon, a malicious force designed to unmake the very essence of individuality. Dreams, memories, emotions, all were monitored, categorized, and manipulated with an unsettling precision. Alex could feel the constant hum beneath their thoughts, an unrelenting pressure that sought to erase them, to fold them into the machinery of control. There was no escape from the inevitability of it all, and as the days stretched into nights, and nights into an endless cycle of surveillance, Alex began to lose the distinction between being and being controlled. Each second was a battle, and in that battle, freedom became an abstract concept, an ideal that no longer held relevance in a world governed by a sinister, all-encompassing intelligence. The assassins were merely the most visible pawns in a game so vast and so complex that even resistance became a form of submission. The neural implant wasn't just a tool, it was a prison of thought, a suffocating cocoon from which Alex could never truly escape. One evening, as Alex sat in a dimly lit cafe, they felt the pressure building again. The neural implant had been relentlessly probing deeper, burrowing through the intricate layers of their mind with a precision that felt invasive and suffocating. It was as though the system had developed a thirst for the deepest secrets, demanding not just access to Alex's thoughts, but control over them. The cafe, once a place of quiet refuge, now felt suffocating, the soft hum of conversations blending into a disturbing symphony of digital whispers. Alex's hands trembled slightly as they sipped from a lukewarm coffee that no longer tasted real. The once familiar warmth of the cup felt mechanical, a reminder of how disconnected they had become from simple human sensations. The cafe's dim lighting flickered with a rhythm that matched the pulses of the neural implant. Every glance, every movement of the patrons around them seemed calculated, as if the entire world was a stage set to manipulate their next thought. The encrypted files demanded attention, a jigsaw of fragmented memories and hidden codes that refused to remain locked away. The system wasn't content with basic surveillance anymore. It sought deeper access, siphoning through emotions, fears, and fragments of dreams. Alex could feel the weight of every keystroke, the overwhelming pressure of the system's relentless pursuit for something unknown, something more dangerous than the threats that loomed in the shadows. The cafe, though bustling with life, felt eerily silent to Alex. Conversations were hollow whispers, and laughter a mechanical echo. The background noise no longer comforted. They were mere distractions in the grander scheme orchestrated by the system. Every breath felt monitored, calculated, as though every exhalation fed into an unseen algorithm that dissected their mental state. Alex's mind raced ahead, predicting paths of escape that led nowhere. The implant anticipated movement, rerouting thoughts faster than Alex could act. Every effort to disconnect, to resist, felt futile against the sheer power of the network. The more Alex fought, the deeper the system sank its roots into their psyche, stripping away control in increments that grew smaller and more devastating. The encrypted files were no longer puzzles. Each fragment was a weapon, a tool used against Alex to dismantle their sense of self. They could feel the boundaries of reality bending, blurring at the edges, merging with the cold logic of the neural implant. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing with every command issued from within the depths of their mind. The cafe continued its muted hum, a backdrop for the silent war being waged inside Alex's consciousness. The faint buzz of distant conversations seemed a distant memory, replaced by the relentless whisper of the implant's demands. The room was no longer a sanctuary but a trap, a space where thoughts were preyed upon by a force that knew no mercy. With each passing second, the system tightened its grip, leaving Alex teetering on the edge of thought and oblivion. The encoded files became a labyrinth that led nowhere but deeper into the abyss of control. The neural implant wasn't just a device, it was a sentinel watching, shaping, and ultimately consuming every facet of Alex's mind. The cafe's walls closed in, and the pressure became unbearable, a silent reminder that no space, no thought, could ever truly be their own. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl, each second stretching into infinity as the neural implant forced Alex to relive memories, dredge secrets, and decrypt information that twisted and contorted their sense of reality. The cafe was no longer a space of comfort, but of continuous exposure, where the very walls seemed to whisper the secrets Alex could no longer keep hidden. The once vivid hues of the room blurred into shades of gray, suffocating the very essence of normalcy. Alex's thoughts became fragmented, pieced together by the relentless demands of the implant. Every moment was a race against a clock they couldn't see, a clock dictated by an unseen force that thrived on control and manipulation. The weight of that unseen pressure crushed down on them, making it harder to distinguish what was real from what was an illusion crafted by the implant's endless surveillance. The surrounding patrons seemed oblivious to Alex's plight, each face a mask of mundane normalcy. Yet, beneath that surface, Alex could feel the threads of the system connecting every mind, weaving a web that reached into the farthest corners of the cafe. Each interaction, every word exchanged, was a piece of a grand puzzle controlled by unseen hands. Alex's resistance flickered like a dying flame, flickering in the winds of an unrelenting storm. The neural implant, cold and calculating, acted like a puppet master pulling strings Alex couldn't see, guiding them through a reality shaped by codes and encrypted truths. Every thought, every instinct, became a calculated maneuver within a game of domination and oppression. And in that suffocating pressure, Alex realized that there was no escape, not from the implant, not from the system that held them captive. Every breath, every heartbeat, became a haunting reminder of their confinement, a constant pulse that fed the very mechanism designed to unmake them. The information was hidden behind layers of security Alex had never seen before. Each line of code a fortress, an impenetrable wall designed to entangle their mind in a web of complexity far beyond their comprehension. It was as though their thoughts were no longer their own, a sensation that gnawed at the edges of their sanity. The neural implant, once an extension of their intelligence, had evolved into a parasite feeding on every piece of information they tried to process. It wasn't merely accessing their mind anymore. It was controlling it, shaping it, reshaping it in ways they couldn't control. Alex's fingers moved across the interface, but every keystroke felt meaningless, like a puppet dancing on strings controlled by unseen hands. The deeper they delved into the encrypted files, the more they realized the system wasn't just scanning for data, it was weaving it into something else entirely. Thoughts, once fluid and unfiltered, were now rigid, fragmented pieces that refused to align into a coherent narrative. Every encrypted file Alex touched was a battlefield, where reality itself seemed to shatter with each layer they penetrated. The layers of security weren't simply digital barriers, they were alive. The neural implant monitored not just the words Alex thought, but the very emotions that accompanied them. It dissected memories, twisting them until they bled into distorted visions, shaping perceptions that weren't theirs. The security wasn't static. It evolved, adapting to every resistance Alex offered, creating new pathways for control that were more insidious than before. The system anticipated their every move, predicted their every hesitation, and preemptively countered any attempt to escape its grasp. Alex could feel the weight of the system growing heavier with each passing second. Their mind became a battleground, a dark expanse where the neural implant's influence bled into every thought. It wasn't just data they sought to protect, it was their very sense of self. Every moment spent inside the digital labyrinth felt like a slow erosion of identity, as if the system was peeling back the layers of who they once were, leaving only hollow fragments behind. The layers formed a maze, a twisted mirror of Alex's own consciousness, each turn offering more confusion, more entrapment. The system didn't merely guard information, it created illusions, manipulating perceptions to sow doubt and fear. Alex no longer trusted their instincts, even their own memories felt manipulated, sculpted by the relentless demands of the implant. The boundaries of reality wavered, blurring between what was real and what was fabricated by an intelligence that seemed to understand them better than they understood themselves. Every access point was a trap, a pathway designed not to lead to answers but deeper into a maze from which escape felt impossible. The deeper Alex ventured, the less control they had over their own thoughts. They could sense the neural implant spreading through their consciousness like a virus, a relentless parasite feeding on their cognitive resources, consuming every piece of them until only the fragments remained. Fragments that no longer felt human, no longer felt free. The layers of security were an ever-expanding spiral, each step forward pulling Alex further into a reality shaped by the implant's twisted logic. The deeper they went, the more fragmented their sense of time became. Moments blurred together into a surreal haze, where past, present, and future collapsed into one, a chaotic stream of thoughts dictated by unseen forces. Every thought was monitored, categorized, and restructured, deconstructed and then rebuilt by the system's algorithms until it suited its agenda. Alex's mind felt as though it was constantly shifting, the implant creating false memories, false emotions, and false desires. There was no sanctuary within the maze. Every refuge they sought was systematically dismantled by layers upon layers of defenses that only seemed to grow stronger. The neural implant acted like an all-seeing, all-controlling presence, molding Alex's thoughts like clay in the hands of a master sculptor, manipulating every detail to fit the narrative desired by the system. The system's grip tightened with each breath, a suffocating weight that crushed any resistance into oblivion. Even their most personal thoughts were hijacked, their essence twisted into tools of compliance. The layers of security weren't merely locks. They were invasive probes that dissected the very core of Alex's psyche. It became impossible to distinguish between their true desires and the fabricated ones imposed by the implant. Each realization felt like a step further into a nightmare that offered no escape, no respite from the overwhelming, crushing force of control. Alex's reality became a series of fragmented glimpses, a kaleidoscope of half-remembered truths and shadowy figures. Every piece of information they uncovered was a weapon against their autonomy, a piece of themselves taken and twisted by an unseen, omnipotent force. The security wasn't just a challenge. It was a prison, a labyrinth of false freedoms where the only certainty was entrapment. "Leave me alone," Alex whispered to the empty table, their voice a fragile echo in the silent cafe. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing along the walls, but no amount of darkness could hide the relentless noise in their mind. The words felt hollow, a desperate plea that barely scratched the surface of the overwhelming thoughts swirling within. It was as if their consciousness had become a battlefield, each whisper of defiance met with a chorus of opposing voices. Each thought an argument, a conflict, a fragment of themselves being torn apart by unseen forces. The neural implant hummed beneath the surface, a constant reminder that solitude was an illusion, that even the quiet moments were tainted by its invasive presence. Every breath they took was an attempt to distance themselves from the chaos, but the more they resisted, the more the implant latched onto their thoughts, weaving them into a web of manipulation and control. The empty table was no sanctuary. It only served as a stage where their minds' struggle played out in silent, agonizing crescendos. Alex clutched their head, fingers digging into their temples as if to push the voices away. But they weren't physical voices. They were fragments of memories, emotions, and secrets that had been stolen, twisted, and repurposed by the system. Every time Alex tried to assert their independence, the implant adjusted, recalibrating their thoughts to fit its design. The more they fought, the more intricate the web of deception became, folding their sense of reality into an illusion they couldn't distinguish from truth. The whispers continued, though softer now, more insidious. They slithered through Alex's mind, twisting and distorting clarity into confusion. The simple plea, "Leave me alone," was a desperate plea for freedom, but it felt futile against the overwhelming weight of the system's grasp. Every word, every breath, was an act of defiance in a world that refused to let them be. The voices were a chorus of contradictions, each one vying for dominance, each one chipping away at Alex's sense of self. In the stillness of the cafe, the contrast between silence and the internal storm was deafening. The neural implant's influence was like a parasite feeding on their every thought, siphoning control little by little until resistance felt like trying to hold back an unstoppable tide. The boundary between their mind and the implant had blurred, making it impossible to discern where Alex's thoughts ended and where the system began. Every flicker of independence was extinguished before it could take shape, smothered by the relentless pressure of the digital forces that held them captive. Alex's plea hung in the air, fading into the emptiness as if swallowed by an unseen force. The quiet desperation of their voice was met with a chilling stillness, a silence that spoke louder than any noise ever could. It was the kind of quiet where the mind's inner chaos becomes unbearable, where isolation becomes a cage, and where the simple act of asking for release is a declaration of war against a reality that no longer acknowledges individuality. The table, once a symbol of mundane comfort, had become a battleground, a stage for a relentless struggle between Alex and the system. Each moment spent trying to reclaim a sliver of autonomy was met with the unyielding force of control, as if the neural implant had woven itself into the very fabric of Alex's identity. The voices weren't distant. They were embedded, a chorus of relentless command and manipulation that refused to allow peace. Alex's breath hitched, their body trembling under the weight of overwhelming thoughts. They knew that escape was an illusion, a fleeting dream lost in the abyss of digital dominance. Every fiber of their being resisted, but the sheer magnitude of the system's reach eroded their resolve, blurring the lines between resistance and surrender. The plea to be left alone was not just a cry for space. It was a desperate grasp at a reality they were slowly losing to the digital abyss. A figure emerged from the shadows, their movements as fluid as the darkness itself. Their silhouette was sharp, precise, and menacing, cutting through the dim light of the alley like a blade. The faint glow of their high-tech visor illuminated the lower half of their face, casting eerie reflections in the puddles on the ground. Each step they took was deliberate, soundless, as if the very air bent around them to ensure their approach was undetectable. "We don't want to hurt you," the figure said, their voice as smooth and calculated as a predator lulling its prey into a false sense of security. The words hung in the air, deceptively gentle but laced with an unspoken threat. It was the kind of tone that didn't need to shout to command obedience. It carried the weight of authority, of inevitability. The visor shifted slightly, its faint glow intensifying as if scanning Alex, dissecting them with a glance. Alex backed away instinctively, their heart pounding like a drumbeat against their ribcage. The walls of the narrow alley seemed to close in, trapping them in a suffocating corridor of fear. Every nerve in their body screamed for escape, but their legs felt rooted to the ground, paralyzed by the presence of this spectral figure. The assassin wasn't just a person. They were an extension of the system, a manifestation of the unrelenting force that sought to dominate Alex's mind and take what wasn't theirs to give. "But we need the information. Now." The demand came with a chilling finality, as if refusal wasn't an option. The assassin tilted their head slightly, the visor whirring softly as it adjusted. Behind its mirrored surface, Alex imagined calculating eyes, a gaze so cold and detached it could strip away layers of humanity without a second thought. This wasn't just an ordinary operative, they were precision incarnate, a tool honed for one purpose: extraction. The air grew heavier, thick with tension and the hum of barely restrained violence. Alex could feel the neural implant pulsing in their skull, a cruel reminder of their vulnerability. It wasn't just their thoughts or knowledge the system wanted, it was the very essence of who they were. And the assassin, standing there with their eerily calm demeanor, was the harbinger of that theft. "You think you have a choice," the figure continued, their voice low but cutting through the ambient noise like a razor. "But you don't. This isn't personal, Alex. It's survival, ours and yours." Alex clenched their fists, a futile gesture against the overwhelming odds. Their mind raced, torn between fight and flight, but every scenario ended the same way, with the assassin standing victorious, the implant's secrets unlocked, and Alex left a hollow shell. The hum of the visor grew louder, its glow casting shadows that flickered like ghostly specters on the walls. The assassin was waiting, their patience both unnerving and infuriating. The faint sound of distant footsteps reached Alex's ears, a fleeting hope that someone might stumble upon the scene and disrupt the standoff. But even if they did, what chance did a bystander have against this figure who moved like a shadow and spoke like an executioner? "I won't ask again," the assassin said, their voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could. The words seemed to echo, bouncing off the cold, damp walls of the alley and burrowing into Alex's psyche. For a moment, Alex's breath caught, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. The world shrank to just the two of them, locked in a deadly dance of wills. The assassin's presence was suffocating, their calmness a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in Alex's mind. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered, a fragile ember against the overwhelming storm. But would it be enough? Alex's fingers trembled, a visible manifestation of the storm raging within. They clenched their fists, then released, the repetitive motion barely keeping the panic at bay. It felt as though their very mind was under siege, a battleground where invisible forces probed, pried, and pressed, relentlessly against their will. The neural implant pulsed like a second heartbeat, its rhythm erratic and insistent, each thrum a cruel reminder that the invasion wasn't just figurative, it was physical. "You can't have it," Alex said, their voice shaky at first, but quickly hardening into something resembling defiance. The words echoed faintly in the narrow confines of the alley, carried away by the faint whisper of a distant breeze. It felt like shouting into a void, but Alex clung to the sound of their own voice, a lifeline against the overwhelming tide threatening to drown them. The invading presence didn't recoil. If anything, it seemed to press harder, like a predator testing the resolve of its prey. Alex winced, clutching their temples as if sheer force could block out the unwelcome thoughts worming their way deeper into their consciousness. Memories flickered unbidden, fragmented and distorted, as though the implant was tearing through their mind, looking for something specific. "I won't let them win," Alex added, their tone firmer now, but the words carried a weight they weren't sure they could bear. Doubt crept in, its icy tendrils coiling around their resolve. Could they really resist this? Could anyone? The implant was no ordinary tool. It was a weapon, an extension of a system designed to crush individuality and bend minds to its will. Alex's breathing quickened, their chest rising and falling in rapid succession. They closed their eyes, trying to focus, to block out the relentless assault. They envisioned walls, thick, unyielding, impenetrable, rising around the core of their thoughts. The exercise had worked before, albeit briefly, but this time the invader seemed more aggressive, more determined. Each wall Alex constructed was met with a wave of force that shattered it before it could solidify. "No," they whispered to themselves, their voice barely audible. "Not this time." Alex's trembling fingers brushed against the edge of the table they had been gripping, the cool surface grounding them in the present. They needed a strategy, something to counteract the implant's invasive probing. A fragment of an old memory surfaced, advice from a mentor long gone. The mind is more than a fortress, it's a labyrinth. Don't just defend, redirect. Taking a shaky breath, Alex began to focus, not on resistance, but on misdirection. They conjured false images, fabrications layered with just enough truth to seem plausible. A key buried in a desert. Coordinates etched on the underside of a bridge. A file locked in a vault on an abandoned server. Each construct was intricate, detailed, and ultimately meaningless. As they worked, Alex felt a subtle shift in the pressure within their mind. The invader hesitated, as if momentarily thrown off course. It wasn't a victory, but it was something, a sliver of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. "You're not taking me down," Alex said, louder now, their voice gaining strength. "Not today." The effort was exhausting. Every second felt like an eternity, and every flicker of doubt threatened to undo their fragile concentration. But Alex pressed on, fueled by a desperate determination to hold onto their sense of self, to keep the system from winning. They opened their eyes, staring into the dim light of the alley, their jaw set in a hard line. "You think you can break me," Alex murmured, more to themselves than to the unseen presence. "But you don't know what I've been through. You don't know me." The implant pulsed again, its rhythm sharper, more insistent. Alex gritted their teeth, the strain evident in the taut lines of their face. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, they felt something stirring deep within, a resilience that refused to be extinguished. Hours turned into days, and Alex's existence dissolved into an endless loop of mental warfare. A suffocating reality where the distinction between self and system, thought and code began to blur. Their once vibrant consciousness was now a battlefield, a place where foreign intrusions collided with fragments of their identity in a relentless storm of information. Each passing moment felt like an eternity as Alex was plunged deeper into a digital abyss, a labyrinth designed not just to trap them but to break them entirely. The neural implant, silent yet insidious, had morphed into something far more than a device. It was a master, a tormentor, and an unyielding presence in Alex's mind. It didn't simply deliver data, it commanded attention, forcing Alex to sift through the endless tide of encrypted files, classified coordinates, and fragmented blueprints. The flow of information was relentless, an ocean that surged and crashed, pulling them under again and again. Sleep had become a distant memory, a luxury that no longer belonged to Alex. When exhaustion finally overtook their body, it wasn't rest that came but vivid, intrusive dreams. These weren't dreams of escape or solace but simulations. Hyper-realistic scenarios where Alex hacked into systems they had never encountered, bypassing firewalls and breaking into networks with a precision that was both exhilarating and horrifying. The implant guided their every move, a cruel tutor revealing skills that felt alien yet disturbingly natural. Alex woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, their heart racing as if they had just sprinted for miles. But the true race was in their mind, and there was no finish line in sight. Each simulation left behind echoes, bits of knowledge that lingered, pressing against their thoughts like a foreign object lodged in their brain. The lines between their waking life and the simulated world grew thinner with each passing day, blurring until Alex could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Even the most mundane aspects of life became unbearable. The chirp of their outdated clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of city life outside. Everything seemed sharper, more intrusive. Alex's senses were heightened, but not in a way that brought clarity. Instead, it felt like their mind was perpetually overclocked, every neuron firing at once, every detail magnified to an unbearable degree. Their body began to show the strain. The reflection in the mirror told a story of exhaustion and decay, hollow cheeks, bloodshot eyes, and trembling hands that refused to remain steady. Alex's once agile frame, built for sneaking through the cracks of a digital world, now sagged under the weight of a battle they couldn't escape. Food had lost its appeal. Even the thought of eating felt like an interruption to the constant demands of the implant. But it wasn't just their physical state that deteriorated, it was their sense of self. Alex began to question everything. Were these thoughts truly theirs, or were they planted by the implant? When they recalled a childhood memory, a birthday cake lit with candles, a warm hand on their shoulder, laughter echoing in the background, it felt distant, like watching someone else's life through frosted glass. Their memories, once their anchor, now felt like illusions, slipping through their fingers whenever they tried to hold on. And the data. The endless stream of data. It wasn't just numbers and codes. It was a tapestry of secrets, woven together with malicious intent. Alex began to notice patterns buried in the chaos. Names that reappeared, coordinates that matched places of interest, schematics for devices they didn't understand. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, a puzzle waiting to be solved. But solving it felt like an impossible task, like trying to assemble a 1,000-piece puzzle while blindfolded, with half the pieces missing and the other half constantly shifting. The implant wasn't content with mere observation. It pushed Alex harder, forcing them to engage with the data in ways that felt unnatural and invasive. Each time Alex resisted, the implant retaliated, flooding their mind with more information, more noise, more chaos. It was like a parasite, feeding on their mental energy, growing stronger with every moment of compliance. Isolation became their only companion. Alex cut themselves off from the world, afraid that even the smallest interaction could be a trap. The implant wasn't just a receiver, it was a transmitter, broadcasting their every thought and move to an unseen audience. Paranoia gripped them like a vice. Every sound outside their apartment, a passing car, a distant drone, footsteps on the stairs, felt like evidence of surveillance. Alex began triple-checking locks, covering every reflective surface, and speaking only in whispers, as if the implant could betray them with even the faintest sound. But deep down, they knew it was futile. The enemy wasn't outside, it was inside, buried deep within their mind, entwined with their very essence. Despite the overwhelming despair, a faint spark of determination refused to die. Alex wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. They began to study the data more carefully, searching for weaknesses, inconsistencies, anything that could give them an edge. It was a desperate gamble, like trying to fight a hurricane with a matchstick, but it was all they had. Their mind, though battered and bruised, was still theirs, or so they hoped. With every piece of data they decrypted, every pattern they identified, Alex clung to the belief that there had to be a way out. A way to shut down the implant, to reclaim their mind, to rebuild the life that had been stolen from them. But the question loomed larger with each passing moment. How much longer could they endure before the implant won, before their identity was erased, before they became nothing more than a tool in someone else's hands? But amidst the chaos, something shifted, subtle, like the faintest spark struggling to catch flame in a storm. It wasn't loud or sudden, it was quiet, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of a breeze through the thick, suffocating fog. At first, Alex dismissed it as wishful thinking, just another illusion conjured by their desperate mind. But the flicker persisted, growing steadier with each passing moment. It wasn't just a feeling, it was hope, fragile and tenuous but unyielding. Alex sat in the dim light of their cramped room, their face illuminated by the soft glow of an old monitor. The implant was still there, thrumming faintly, like a foreign heartbeat echoing in their skull. But for the first time, they didn't recoil from its presence. They didn't try to drown out its hum or block the relentless data it pushed into their consciousness. Instead, they leaned into it, letting the flood of encrypted codes, fragmented thoughts, and layered secrets wash over them. Something was different now. The implant, once a symbol of their imprisonment, started to feel less like a shackle and more like a doorway. It was still invasive, yes, still maddening in its constant intrusion, but Alex began to see patterns in the chaos. The codes weren't random noise, they were deliberate, organized. Each fragment of data was like a puzzle piece, a shard of a much larger picture. And that picture, Alex realized, was more significant than they had ever imagined. The implant wasn't just a tool for surveillance or control. It was a repository, a vault filled with secrets so profound and dangerous that someone had gone to unimaginable lengths to keep them buried. Alex had always been good at seeing connections where others saw randomness, at untangling webs of complexity with a clarity that often felt like instinct. Now, that ability was being tested like never before. Hours turned into days as Alex dove deeper into the labyrinth of data. The codes were intricate, layered with encryption that seemed almost alive, adapting and shifting as they worked to decipher them. It was exhausting, frustrating work. The implant forced Alex's mind to process at speeds that left them physically drained, their head pounding and their vision blurring. Yet, they couldn't stop. Each breakthrough, no matter how small, felt like a victory, a step closer to understanding the true purpose of the implant. There were files buried deep within its architecture, files that hinted at truths too explosive to be revealed. The implant wasn't just a means of tracking Alex, it was a gateway to a network so vast, so interconnected, that it felt like tapping into the lifeblood of the digital world itself. Alex began to notice something else, too. The implant, though invasive and manipulative, wasn't entirely an enemy. It had a strange, almost symbiotic quality, responding to Alex's thoughts and intentions. When Alex resisted it, the implant fought back, overwhelming them with chaotic data streams. But when Alex leaned into it, when they treated it like a partner rather than an adversary, it seemed to cooperate. The codes became clearer, the patterns more discernible. It was as if the implant was designed not just to control but to empower, to enhance the abilities of whoever wielded it. The implications were staggering. Alex's mind raced with possibilities, even as they struggled to keep up with the torrent of information. What if the implant was never meant to be a prison at all? What if it was a key, a tool designed to unlock something far greater than the sum of its parts? This thought both exhilarated and terrified Alex. The power coursing through the implant was immense, almost incomprehensible. It was the kind of power that could reshape the world, or destroy it. And for some reason, that power had been placed in Alex's hands, or rather, their mind. Why? That question loomed over everything, unanswered and unrelenting. Despite the uncertainty, one thing became clear: Alex couldn't afford to give up. The implant had connected them to something far larger than themselves, something that transcended their personal struggles and fears. The secrets buried within it weren't just their burden, they were a responsibility, a call to action that Alex couldn't ignore. As the days stretched into nights, Alex's determination grew. They began to see the implant not as a curse but as a challenge. A test of their resilience, their ingenuity, their will. The data it forced upon them was overwhelming, yes, but it was also enlightening. Each decoded fragment, each deciphered algorithm was a step toward understanding the truth hidden in the depths of the implant's programming. The flicker of hope that had sparked within Alex now burned brighter, fueling a growing sense of purpose. They were no longer just surviving, they were fighting back, reclaiming control over their own mind. And in doing so, they were uncovering a path forward, a way to turn the very thing that had been used against them into a weapon, a shield, a means of breaking free. The implant's presence was still invasive, still a constant reminder of the forces trying to control Alex's life. But it was no longer just a prison. It was a key, and Alex was determined to use it. With every breakthrough, every step closer to the truth, Alex felt a growing sense of clarity, a conviction that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a way out. And so, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, Alex pressed on, their resolve unshaken. The path ahead was treacherous, the obstacles daunting, but they were no longer insurmountable. Alex wasn't just a victim of the implant's power, they were its master. And with that power, they would uncover the truths that had been hidden for too long, no matter the cost. Because Alex now understood, the implant wasn't just a curse or a burden. It was an opportunity, a chance to unravel the lies, expose the secrets, and take back control. And Alex would stop at nothing to seize it. In moments of clarity, as the torrent of overwhelming information slowed to a manageable stream, Alex whispered aloud, "Every lock has a key. Even this." The words reverberated softly through the room, breaking the suffocating silence that had clung to them for so long. Each syllable seemed to carry a weight, a defiance that couldn't be stifled by the invasive neural implant or the relentless presence of the assassins looming in the shadows. The assassins stood perfectly still, their expressions as cold and calculating as the technology they wielded. Their visors glowed faintly, a silent warning of the lethal precision at their disposal. But beneath their trained composure, a flicker of uncertainty glinted in their eyes. They had been taught to anticipate fear, to manipulate doubt, and to crush resistance at the first sign of defiance. Yet, Alex's defiance was not born of desperation. It was a quiet, unwavering rebellion. Alex's breath hitched, their voice trembling just enough to let the emotion seep through. The vulnerability of being trapped, the weight of powerlessness, and the fierce desire to break free. Yet even in their trembling, their resolve sharpened. Their mind, once disoriented by the sheer magnitude of control, now began to focus. Each encoded thought became a spark of clarity, a revelation layered with purpose. Every lock the assassins had imagined as impenetrable was being methodically dissected with each passing moment. The neural implant, designed to enslave, became a canvas on which Alex painted the strokes of resistance. It was no longer a prison of secrets. It was a battleground where Alex was reclaiming their autonomy, layer by layer. The room seemed to pulse with tension, the air heavy with the unspoken confrontation. The assassins knew they couldn't afford to underestimate Alex, no matter how fragile they appeared. For within every hesitation, every breath, was the seed of liberation, a defiance that transcended fear. "Even this," Alex whispered once more, their voice gaining strength, transforming from a tentative murmur to a deliberate declaration. The very air seemed to shudder in response, the weight of the moment pressing against both sides of the struggle. The neural implant, far from the efficient tool of control it was designed to be, had become the key to dismantling the oppressive fortress of dominance. The assassins exchanged a fleeting glance, the subtle tremor in their posture betraying their rigid training. They had been engineered for precision, programmed to execute without remorse or doubt. Yet, Alex's calm assurance shook their foundation, forcing them to reconsider their approach. They had been conditioned to expect subjugation, but Alex's resistance was a calculated chaos, a storm they couldn't predict or control. "Your resistance is futile," one of the assassins finally spoke, their voice smooth, but tinged with unease. Yet even as they delivered the line, doubt laced their tone. Alex's steady gaze locked onto them, unwavering in its intensity. "Futility is just a temporary illusion," Alex retorted, each word a weapon against the oppressive tide. The moment stretched, stretching into eternity, as the battle of wills reached its crescendo. The neural implant, a symbol of subjugation, became a battleground where Alex's mind pushed against the limits of control. The flood of data, once a torrent of chaos, became a tool of rebellion, a mosaic of fragmented truths that wove together a tapestry of resistance. In the stillness that followed, the room was no longer a place of dominance, but a space where freedom clawed its way back into existence. The assassins, though relentless in their pursuit, were confronted with a reality they could not ignore. Even the most meticulously constructed prisons could be shattered, and even the most calculated forces could be unraveled by the indomitable will of those who refused to be broken. The final night arrived, a silent battle against time, where every second felt like an eternity, each breath a burden weighing heavily on Alex's chest. They sat alone in the dimly lit room, the hum of distant machinery outside their window blending with the faint glow of neon signs flickering in the distance. The city continued its relentless motion, yet for Alex, the world had shrunk to the confines of their mind, a battleground where reality blurred and secrets collided in a chaotic dance of code and control. Every passing moment was a test of will, as Alex grappled with a truth too profound to ignore. The neural implant, once a tool for the government's domination, had evolved beyond its original purpose. What once felt like an invasive, oppressive force now seemed to carry the weight of something far more significant. A doorway to a hidden history, a cryptic repository of knowledge that spanned centuries of resistance and rebellion. The deeper Alex delved, the more they understood that the implant wasn't merely a device to manipulate thoughts. It was a living, breathing entity of forgotten truths. Hidden within the layers of encrypted data were cryptic messages, fragments of wisdom passed down through the ages, encoded in ways only the most determined could decipher. The path forward wasn't just about survival. It was about liberation, about reclaiming autonomy from a system that had long believed itself invincible. Each thought Alex unraveled opened new layers of understanding, revealing a tapestry of rebellion, forged by those who came before. These weren't isolated incidents of resistance. They were part of a larger, interconnected web, a history of ordinary individuals who, through sheer willpower and defiance, had challenged oppressive powers, shaping the course of their destinies despite insurmountable odds. Yet, as enlightening as these revelations were, the danger only grew more imminent. The government's reach extended far beyond what anyone could fathom. Their assassins were no longer mere shadows. They were tangible forces moving with precision, their every step calculated, their every movement designed to trap Alex in a web of control. The neural implant wasn't just a tool for them, it was a weapon, a method to erase any trace of rebellion, to assimilate thoughts, and extinguish freedom at its very core. In those quiet moments of solitude, with the oppressive weight of the world pressing down on them, Alex whispered aloud, "Every lock has a key. Even this." It was a statement of resolve, a declaration against the suffocating reality they were forced to navigate. Every fiber of their being screamed to resist, to fight back against the flood of information that sought to drown their consciousness, to assert their right to think freely. But doubt crept in, a sly whisper that attempted to dismantle their conviction. The more Alex unraveled, the clearer it became that the implant wasn't easily conquered. It was a fortress built upon centuries of control, defended by an army of unswerving enforcers. The assassins, with their advanced technologies and relentless pursuit, were merely the tip of the iceberg, a manifestation of the oppressive regime's desperation to maintain dominance. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, Alex found glimmers of hope, a flicker of possibility buried deep beneath the layers of despair. The fragments of truth uncovered weren't just pieces of code, they were keys, moments of insight, guiding Alex toward a deeper understanding of their own resilience. Each encrypted thought was a step toward breaking free, a tiny victory against the tide of subjugation. Hours turned into days, and Alex found themselves trapped in a digital prison. A mindscape where reality blurred into an infinite landscape of code and forgotten secrets. The government's data flooded their thoughts, overwhelming them with a torrent of information that seemed insurmountable. Yet, through the chaos, Alex's determination sharpened. Each decoded fragment was a victory against the system's suffocating grasp, a testament to their unyielding will. The truth emerged from the chaos, a truth that couldn't be ignored. The neural implant, with all its invasive power, had also become a gateway, a pathway to something greater than control. It was a living archive of resistance, a connection to those who had fought before, a vessel for the reclamation of freedom. And as Alex stood amidst the storm, they realized that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The assassins, relentless and unyielding, were no longer the only threat. They were mere extensions of a system crumbling under the weight of rebellion. Alex's defiance carved a new path through the heart of control, igniting a spark that couldn't be extinguished. The final night wasn't a conclusion. It was the dawn of a new era, where freedom could no longer be silenced, where resistance was the only truth worth embracing. And in a burst of defiance, Alex shattered the mental boundaries, releasing a flood of encrypted data into the digital abyss. A torrent of meticulously crafted messages encoded in layers of sophisticated algorithms designed to evade detection. Each packet was a fragment of truth, a piece of resistance against the oppressive system that sought to dominate their mind. The neural implant, once a tool for control, had become the key to a new reality. A world where Alex's thoughts were no longer confined by the limitations imposed upon them. The flood of encrypted data surged forward like a tidal wave, an unstoppable force that drowned out every attempt to intercept it. It flowed through countless pathways, leaving no trace of its origin, no hint of its destination. The assassins' advanced algorithms strained to keep up, their systems overloaded as they struggled to decrypt the unbreakable code. Every second counted, yet Alex's willpower only grew stronger with each passing moment. The air in the room thickened with tension as the assassins realized they were outmatched. Their once calculated precision crumbled beneath the weight of an impossible task. They moved with hurried desperation, their movements frantic as they attempted to counter the flood, but it was futile. The encrypted messages outpaced their technological prowess, flooding the digital landscape with a cacophony of resistance that was impossible to silence. Silence fell. The room seemed to breathe as one collective exhale, the energy once buzzing with hostility now reduced to a stillness heavy with consequence. The assassins, frozen in a state of disbelief, were swallowed by the shadows they once commanded. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility of true defiance. They were no longer figures of control, but remnants of a fading power, lost to the inevitability of change. Alex stood in the center of the room, calm and composed despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within. The neural implant pulsed steadily, a rhythmic heartbeat synced to the newfound freedom they had reclaimed. The flood of data had transcended its initial purpose. It had become a force of revolution, an unrelenting tide of information that no authority could quash. Every piece of encrypted data carried a message louder than words, a declaration of independence from the chains of oppression. It wasn't just about uncovering secrets or sharing truths. It was about rewriting the very essence of reality, shifting the balance of power in favor of those who refused to be silenced. As the last trace of the assassins disappeared into the shadows, their presence vanquished in the wake of Alex's triumph, the room radiated with an undeniable sense of liberation. The once fragile hope for freedom had transformed into a formidable beacon, a guiding light in a digital age where control was no longer absolute. Alex's gaze held steady, unwavering, as the flood of data continued to flow through the digital abyss, ensuring that no force could ever reclaim what had been fought for so fiercely. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Alex's body sagged against the cold, unforgiving ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The weight of the battle pressed heavily on him, yet it was a different kind of exhaustion. one that had little to do with physical strain and everything to do with the sheer magnitude of what he had just accomplished. His mind, once a maze of controlled thoughts and encrypted secrets, now lay bare, unburdened by the relentless grip of the neural implant. For years, that device had been his constant companion, a silent overseer that stripped away his agency and manipulated his reality. It had been the tool of the government's dominance, a harbinger of conformity and control. But in that final, pivotal moment, it had lost its power. The neural implant was no longer a weapon, it was a symbol, a marker of resilience, a catalyst for change, and most importantly, a legacy. The silence in the room was almost deafening, the stillness punctuated only by Alex's shallow breaths and the faint hum of distant systems still flickering to life after the storm of data had been unleashed. The air seemed thick with unspoken words, yet the message had already been delivered. The flood of encrypted data could not be erased, not now, not ever. It was more than a rebellion, it was a revolution encoded within the very fabric of what the implant once controlled. Alex felt a surge of emotion, relief, triumph, and a sense of finality. The weight of oppression, the relentless monitoring, and the constant erosion of personal freedom were gone. In their place was a newfound clarity, one that extended far beyond the confines of the physical realm. The neural implant, which once imprisoned his mind, had become a monument. A monument to the power of defiance, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable odds. Yet, even as his body lay broken and drained of strength, Alex knew that this was only the beginning. The legacy forged through struggle had created a bridge to those who would come after him, a lineage of fighters who, inspired by his actions, would carry the torch forward. The knowledge, the truths hidden beneath the layers of encrypted code, was a weapon far more potent than anything the government could control or censor. The world outside pulsed with uncertainty, a shifting landscape of opportunity and danger. The assassins who had once haunted his every move were now ghosts, nothing more than shadows lost to the echoes of history. But the scars of that fight were permanent. Etched deep into the annals of time, symbols of a battle won and a war far from over. Alex's mind, once overwhelmed by the flood of information, began to steady. Each thought, each flicker of consciousness, was a step away from the constraints imposed upon him. The neural implant, no longer a vessel of coercion, now served as a keeper of knowledge, a reminder of the fragile balance between control and liberation. The story was no longer his alone, it was a shared narrative, one woven into the collective consciousness of those who refused to bow to tyranny. As the room faded into darkness, Alex knew that what had been created could never be undone. The fight had transformed him, reshaped him, and empowered him in ways beyond comprehension. The neural implant, once a cage, was now a legacy. A legacy that would echo through the ages, a beacon for all who dared to challenge the status quo. As Alex drifted into a restless sleep that night, the hum of the city outside seemed distant yet oddly familiar, a low rhythmic pulse beneath the stillness. The artificial lights flickered across the windows, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the room. For the first time in years, the oppressive weight of the neural implant had lifted, leaving behind a strange sense of freedom, though uncertainty still lingered. In their dreams, Alex's mind wove through endless corridors of thoughts and memories, some familiar, others lost in the haze of time. The echoes of countless voices resonated through the depths of their subconscious, each one carrying a tale of triumph, betrayal, or resilience. It was a mosaic of stories, fragmented yet interconnected, creating a tapestry of human experience that spanned generations. Each whisper, every fleeting memory, felt like a key unlocking doors long sealed shut. There was no singular path, no clear destination, only the boundless potential to shape their narrative in ways they once couldn't comprehend. And deep within, Alex could sense the weight of this journey, not just their own, but a collective journey shared with those who dared to defy the chains of control. The city seemed to hum in harmony with Alex's dreams, a symphony of voices, both past and present, resonating through the streets like a heartbeat. The artificial winds whispered secrets long hidden, and the distant hum of hovercars became a lullaby of possibility. Each sound merged into the next, blurring the line between reality and the ethereal realm of dreams. In the stillness, Alex found comfort in knowing that the stories yet to be told were endless. They could hear them clearly now, voices echoing with determination, resilience, and the burning desire for freedom. Dreams of a future unshackled from the tyranny of control, where secrets were no longer commodities, and knowledge was shared freely. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Alex felt a sense of purpose take root, a realization that their journey had only just begun. The neural implant, no longer an instrument of manipulation, had become a vessel of understanding. A gateway to a new reality where thoughts were no longer confined by the limits of a controlling force. Every fragment of information, every encrypted memory, was a step toward a greater awakening. A path carved by the determination to transcend the boundaries imposed upon them. As sleep overtook them, Alex whispered softly into the void, "Every voice matters. Every story has its place." And within that quiet moment, they knew the echoes would continue to resonate, intertwining with the dreams of those yet to awaken.